Hey, what's up, y'all? Welcome to episode 10 of the Bad Eye Podcast. That's right, baby. We made it to 10. I'm your host, Andrew, the number one Afro Turkic podcast host in the greater Toronto area, the goat of goat curry, if you will. We've got a very special episode for you this week. That's why I put in the name. We are going to be talking about the Canadian federal election that's happening right now. It's going to be kind of a freeform discussion of various issues that have come up this election cycle, breaking down some of the campaign promises and policy proposals, some discussions about politics in general, and our general takes on who you should vote for. I do want to remind you that these are just opinions, and I've made my opinions pretty clear in previous episodes already, but I also want to remind you that no matter who you vote for, you should vote if you haven't already. I hear people say sometimes that democracy is a privilege and not a right, and that's something I really strongly disagree with. But I do believe that a right that's not exercised and defended doesn't even have to be taken away. You've taken it away from yourself. So do vote. Early voting closed on Monday, but election day is next Monday, April 28th. So there's still time to vote if you haven't already, if you're eligible. But before you do, listen to this episode. We've got a long one for you this week. Another election special with our first returning illustrious guest, fellow lefty and also fellow card carrying member of the Canadian Association of Certified Yappers, Patricia. For those of you whose memories may need a bit of a refresh, Patricia is an Inuk born in St. John's, Newfoundland, and is currently a PhD candidate living in Minneapolis, Minnesota on Dakota and Ojibwe homelands. If you listen to our Ontario election special, you will recognize her. She was great in that episode. She hopefully, well, not hopefully, she will definitely be great in this episode. And I want to say a big welcome back to Patricia.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for the vote of confidence. Appreciate it. It's always nice to have it from someone who's not, biologically related to you.
Yeah, no, I can confirm we are not related at all. That was genuine praise. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being here. Yeah, I am excited to talk about the election with you. I'm excited to talk about the debate a little bit. We're gonna probably break it down into the kind of general segments that they've been covering, the way that the media has been covering them, and also the way that the debate has been broken up. And we'll go from there. We'll see where the conversation takes us, as we mentioned last time, and I have mentioned when I edited the previous episode that we recorded into like 3 episodes. We were both certified yappers, so I'm sure that there will be no shortage of tangents that we go on because I cannot stay focused on one thing for more than 25 seconds. So let's get right into it. For some context for the listeners, we are in the midst of a federal election in Canada right now. That is what we'll be talking about for the bulk of the episode, if not the entire episode. The I know that some of our audience are American, and so while Canada might be the news, you might not know anything about Canada. There are 3, sometimes 4, sometimes 5 major parties in Canada. Really, mainly 3. There are, and they're helpfully, well, actually, I was going to say they're helpfully named by their ideological orientation, but it depends on how you think about it. The Conservatives are aptly named because they are conservative. That's what they're called. They're the Conservative Party, and they are conservative. The Liberal Party, I mean, if you are a leftist, then the Liberal Party is quite aptly named because they are big L liberals. But if you are not a leftist and you think of yourself as left wing, then the Liberal Party is probably not very aptly named because they are a centrist party. They're a center right party, if anything. And then there's the NDP, the New Democratic Party, who formerly socialist, now kind of something. But they are ostensibly the major left wing party in Canada, and so those are the 3 major parties that we'll be talking about. Are going to kind of break down their policy proposals during this election, and sort of talk about where they stand on different issues, where we agree with them, where we disagree with them, and we'll get our takes as well. So yeah, let's get right into it. We'll talk about housing first. Canada has been in, as you know, probably because you lived here, and as I know because I currently live here, in a housing crisis for the previous forever.
Yeah, I
And
was gonna say our whole lifetime question mark.
yeah, just the entire time they've been, oh, housing crisis. It's surely it's going to get better at some point. I've heard every version of every plan under the sun to address this issue. So far, none of them have addressed the issues, but we'll talk about what the plans are going forward, and we'll see whether we think any of those are going to work. Um, so, I mean, before we get into it, do you have any thoughts about, you know, what's been done so far? And like, I mean, I have ideas about why the housing crisis is as bad as it is, but I don't know. I want to open the floor before we like get into policy.
Yeah. I mean, I used to work on housing related issues somewhat when I worked for Nunatsiavut government in Labrador. And something that I learned in that episode of my life was that there's this thing called the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation. And they used to build stuff. Um, we used to be a country that built stuff. But in I don't know exactly when the policy shift happened, but like probably during the last 30 years or so, they stopped building kind of like federally owned public housing or like, rent controlled housing, and instead have like shifted basically to kind of be a public financier of rent controlled or subsidized or what kind of housing projects, where like if you're a province or like a native community, you can apply and be like, hey, or like, I mean, I think also municipalities, and be like, hey, like we want to build this or that. And like they have various criteria they use. And so, I mean, I think it's that like that shift of going from having the government directly build stuff and directly finance, and like from directly building things to suddenly financing things, like speaks to the outsourcing um that plagues, I think, Canada. I can't speak really to Europe. Maybe it happens there to extents too, but I think that's like one thing that um even like the NDP's plan on housing, which is a national rent control system, is still like is still ceding a lot to the private market. Like, even though rent controls are a very underused tool in the Canadian housing market, it's still a tool that allows like private interests at the end of the day to be the ones reaping the rewards for being able to afford to buy a house.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that I actually wanted to talk about is eh, I mean, I did not know that the Canada Mortgage Corporation, is that what it's called?
Yeah,
I forgot
Mortgage
what
and
the
Housing Corporation. Yeah.
yeah, the
Hmm.
Mortgage and Housing Corporation.
CMHC.
Yeah, I did not know that they were formerly a program that built homes. It seems like that would be the exact solution to the problem that we are currently in and have been in for a while. Um, yeah, I mean, it makes sense to me that that is the root, because you're right. Even the NDP proposal, like it rent control would be great. I would love some rent control. Ontario rent control worked pretty well for me in my life personally until they repealed it. And I feel like that's really when we saw rents in Toronto in particular explode. But you're right, rent control is kind of a band-aid solution. I mean, one thing I will say for the rent control policy is that unlike the other two parties, the NDP is proposing something that would help renters generally. But you're right, like there should be, and this is a policy failure, I think, at all levels. There should be avenues into the housing market for people at all income levels, and that's one of the things that I think is really missing from all of these plans, because the liberal plan is to remove GST for first time home buyers on homes, which is great if you can afford to buy a home. But the cheapest homes in many places in the country are like wildly out of reach, even if you take the GST off of them, are wildly out of reach for the average person making the average, income. The conservative plan, I think, is even worse because it's a blanket removal of GST on all homes, which sounds good in theory, except that it doesn't matter if it's your first home or your 15th home. And so, that's really the most regressive way that you could be attempting to tackle this issue. It's kind of like if at one end of the spectrum we have the government directly building housing for people and subsidizing it at affordable rates, This is like the exact opposite of that. It's the government is basically actively subsidizing housing for the richest people and for private equity corporations to just buy up homes and then rent them out at presumably extortionate rates, because once they've bought up all the homes and consumed all the supply, they get to set the price of rent because there are no other homes available. Um,
And there's a direct case study of that basically in the North, which is like, if there's anyone like listening in from Inuit Nunangat or the other or the territories, will probably have heard of Northview, which is the primary kind of like rental company, corporate landlord of the Arctic. And they are like now publicly listed on the Toronto Stock Exchange. And so, like in the North, like Inuit live, I think, more than 10 times as likely to live in an overcrowded home than other Canadians. And so, like, just having a home is like a thing. And then these homes are like falling apart. CBC did a really good in depth look into this like maybe 4 or 5 years ago now, like around the time when the company went public. But um, there are people in like Yellowknife, they own a ton of property where there's like mold, and they like contact their property manager employed by this like hedge fund company out of Toronto. And so it literally is like this publicly listed company is making money off of like a housing crisis on a new order of magnitude than like what exists in a lot of parts of southern Canada. And so yeah, the conservative plan basically is just something that would allow that kind of housing speculation to occur in other parts of Canada. And I mean, we can look to, for people who aren't familiar with like what a lot of the housing stock in Toronto is like, one of the things that makes Toronto a bit of an odd city is like there's not really walk-ups like the way that there are in Montreal or New York, for example. And so Toronto is almost exclusively giant condo buildings and single family dwellings. Um, the result has been you get these people who can afford to buy more than one home buy a house and then split it up into like 3 or 4 apartments. And so you get all these really weirdly laid out apartments because like they're just floors of
yeah,
of one home that's supposed to be for one family that's
yep.
now being renovated. And so anyways, like all that is to say, like I imagine that if the Conservatives are successful in forming government after this election, that unfortunately, I think the housing stock in a lot of other Canadian cities will start to look a lot more like Toronto.
Yeah, and I mean, as someone who is a lifelong Torontonian, like there are a couple walk-ups, but you're right. Like most of them are these weird kind of unintentional apartments where like if you get the top floor, then your bedroom and your bathroom might be in a normal place. But if you're anywhere in the middle, like the floor plan is all over the place. Like you got
Yeah,
weird
it's wild.
walls. Sometimes they're at like angles. It's super strange.
Yeah,
So, if you're living in the rest of the country, look forward to that. That's hopefully not coming
coming your
to a
way.
city near you, but maybe. Um, yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think more broadly, like, I mean, a thing that stood out to me from what you said was that, I mean, one, this is a crisis that they're already dealing with in the North, which I think more broadly, like, we never talk about the North and its particular needs, and even more generally than that, like, not even specific to the North, like, I mean, first of all, like, I don't even know that you can uniformly say the North. Like, I don't know that the needs that they have in Nunavut are the same needs that they have in the Northwest Territories. Like, the geography is very different, the environment's very different. There probably are different priorities, but like even on a federal level, like the kind of housing supports that we need in Ontario are probably very different than the ones that they need in BC and the ones that they need in Alberta and Manitoba. And like, yes, we have provincial governments obviously to address that, but like these kinds of blanket solutions even at a federal level, maybe don't make sense. I mean, this particular one makes no, like, removing the GST. First of all, it also like is effectively a tax cut. Like that's a huge revenue hit to the government
Yeah.
from primarily higher income people, because those are the people who can afford to buy homes, which is another thing that I think we should talk about. That like okay, great, we're giving people tax breaks, but like that money could be used on stuff. And now they're going to have to cut spending somewhere else to make up for the shortfall of income that, primarily like higher middle income and like rich people are going to be saving money on this.
Yeah, and I think that's such an excellent point to bring up because the GST itself is actually a hugely regressive tax, right? Because it's a flat tax, which means that if you're it doesn't like unlike tax brackets, right, which say that okay, like you make under $50,000 a year, therefore you can afford like we'll tax you like at a let's say a 10% rate, and then it's like because 10% of 50,000 is $5,000. But like let's say we had like a flat tax where like everyone in Canada paid $5,000 in tax, like people who only make $20,000 a year, that's 25% of their income. But if you're like a millionaire, that's like less than 1% of your income. And so I think math, whatever. I'm doing this on the fly. But the
It's
point
a small
being is
amount.
that it's a small amount. It's a drop in the bucket for a millionaire. And so that's why, we do tax brackets in Canada and have progressive taxation is that the idea being people who make more, if you ask them to pay a little bit more, it doesn't actually impact them to the same degree. And so the GST, on the other hand, like I remember I used to work retail in high school, and I had someone come into the store. Shout out to Blue Notes fans out there where I used to work. I
You
had
used
someone
to
come
work
into
at
Blue
Blue
Notes.
Notes?
I used to work at Blue Notes, throwback, and one of my customers asked me, "Oh, how much is it with tax?" And so like I had to do the math in my head, and then she was like, "Oh, okay," and like folded the jeans back up and like walked out of the store because she could afford them before the tax, but she could not afford them after the tax. And so, if you're someone who's making, um, kind of a quote unquote reasonable salary, um, like that kind of stuff probably doesn't happen to you, but that doesn't mean it doesn't happen to other people. And that's just for genes, right? And so let's like cross that. Like in Minnesota, where I live now, um, they don't have any taxes on food or clothing. Like there are no state taxes on any food or any clothing. And that's actually a lot more of a progressive policy than what we see in Canada, where like the GST or HST, if you're in the Atlantic provinces, it is actually very regressive. And so, like, I think one thing that I would love to see from instead of giving tax breaks to people who are wealthy in that they can afford to buy a home, possibly multiple homes, um, instead, like, what if we just scrapped the GST, but like raised made a new tax bracket for people who make like more than $1 million a year, and like, had that be the highest tax bracket, like I just think that there surely is a more fair way that the government could make the amount of money it makes now from the GST that like didn't disproportionately harm people who are like already struggling to afford a decent quality of living in supposedly the first world country that I grew up in.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I like you hear it even from like Europeans who come here all the time. And look, Europe also has sales tax. Like, this is not. But one of the things that Europe does that we do not do for some reason, to avoid the exact situation that you were just describing with that lady who couldn't afford her jeans with the tax, is in Europe the sales tax is written on the like the price that you see on the shelf includes the sales tax. So you would know, and you wouldn't have to. I mean, the sales tax is still there. It's still regressive, but at least you wouldn't have to have the like kind of humiliating moment of like having to ask for like, oh, how much is this with tax? Oh man, I don't have that much money. Like that, the bare minimum is doing that, and it drives me nuts that we don't do that. We do it with some things for some reason. Like I just filled up my car, and the tax is included if you're paying at the gas station, but like on store shelves, if we're going to have a sales tax, and I agree that we should not, but like if we're going to have one, at least put it in the price, because it drives everyone nuts when they come here and they're like, oh yeah, I can afford this. It's $18, and then you get there and it's like 23.50. So I mean that's kind of a tangential point, but I think there's an additional social element to like having it, and
Yeah,
you're just kind of it's ingrained in you to like, I always think like, oh yeah, that's not actually the price, like I have to like add a little bit, um which influences your behavior too, because it makes you buy things that you think are cheaper than they are, right? Like if I walked into something, a store, and it said it was 25 bucks, I might not buy it, but it says it's 20 bucks, so I'm gonna buy it, like, and then I get to the store and I'm
but
spending more money than I intended to.
Andrew, the thing is that then that would involve the Canadian government having to ask a corporation to do a thing.
That's
And we
true.
know Canadian government doesn't ask corporations to do things. So
That's true. I mean, it would be like asking, it'd be like the Spider-Man meme where they're like, wait, but I am a corporation effectively. Like I'm actually just like three in a trench coat. But anyways, um, but yeah, no, I mean, I like that's a good segue into the affordability part of the conversation, because one of the parties actually is proposing to scrap the GST, at least on certain things, like that part of the NDP plan, and proposal for how to address the kind of general affordability crisis that we're in, is to remove GST on a number of items, like essential items like groceries and certain other things. And I mean, one of the things, like, it kind of shocks me that the liberals did not propose that. I mean, I have been reading a lot about how that was a tremendously unpopular policy and it destroyed Justin Trudeau's career. And I'm not really sure where that's coming from, because everyone I know loved the GST holiday. Like they were like, oh yeah, it's great that I like don't have to, pay that extra little bit when I'm going to restaurants or at the grocery store. So it's weird to me that like all the coverage that I've read about it has been about how that was really the thing that kind of, destroyed his career, and it was so tremendously
that's
unpopular. So they literally,
fascinating.
yeah, I don't know a single person that was not happy about that. I feel like everyone was like uniformly like, yeah, this is great. Let's do more of that. Um,
Sorry, this is like again like another little sidebar from us, but it also reminds me of like another thing I wanted to like mention was around the way that the media is covering the election. And like I've been thinking around to what extent, you know, yes, there are polls, and the polls are showing that the surge in the support to the Liberal Party is by and large coming at the expense of the NDP. But then I don't like, to me that's not a clear A to B to C for why. I feel as though the NDP has also been sidelined in media coverage, so it's almost
agreed.
as though like because there's some kind of decision in the newsroom around this, it then means that like the NDP quote unquote doesn't deserve to get covered, or like they're no longer, like I don't understand why that means they're no longer newsworthy. Like surely like the fact that they're still trying to fight an election should warrant coverage.
Yeah.
um because I found that strange as well. Like that there's, it almost feels like there, like it feels like a like quite a noticeable absence to me in any case.
Yeah. And look, there are definitely some things to criticize, I think, about the way that the NDP is running this campaign. And like maybe we can get into that later. But like I think that that's a really valid point. I also think that like in another way, it's not necessary. Yes, like support is pulling from the NDP towards the Liberals, but I don't even know that that's necessarily an indication that of the Liberals' popularity as much as it is of the conservative, alignment with Donald Trump really hurting the conservative party, and particularly with people on the left who are like, yeah, I absolutely do not want this guy to be fucking prime minister, so I'm gonna hold my nose and vote for a guy who like I mean, this is another, kind of aside, but like in in any sane timeline, in any like universe with any kind of common sense, like Mark Carney would be a conservative. Like he'd be the head of the conservative party. It's just that like the Overton window has shifted so far to the right that we have like I'm gonna destroy the woke military guy, which is like the fucking craziest. Like, what does that even? He can't even define what that word means, and that's like their whole thing right now. Like in any sane universe, in any sane country, Mark Carney is the conservative. Like he's like a
Yeah.
big business guy who's like his whole thing is like, yeah, I ran a company that you know like took extensive advantage of tax havens in Bermuda, and that's why I know how to close those tax loopholes. Even though I'm not going to do that. I haven't said at all that I'm going to do that, but that is, I know that they're there, which is
Literally.
but
Yo.
that's where we are, and so I think that like it says a lot. I mean, it says something that he's surging in popularity, but I don't think that it says what people are making it say, which is that like this is the guy. Like we definitely want this guy, because I think that what's actually happening is that a lot of people on the left are looking at the options and being like, okay, well, it's unlikely that Jagmeet is going to be prime minister. And I really don't fucking want that guy to be prime minister because he's crazy. And so I'm going to hold my nose, which is like, this is what always happens. But like, I'm going to hold my nose and I'm going to vote for the milk toast guy that I don't really agree with. Um, in a similar way to, and well, okay, I don't want to make a comparison to Donald Trump because it's not the same thing. But I do think that like what is going to happen is if the liberals win and win significantly, they are going to assume that that means that they have a mandate that they do not have. In the same way that like Donald Trump won this election and immediately was like, yes, the people love me and they're on my side, and I'm going to get to do whatever I want. I mean, obviously, I don't think Mark Carney's plan is to start disappearing people, but like I do think that like they're gonna assume that this means that everyone loves them,
Yeah.
which is like not what's happening.
Yeah, and I mean, I think this brings me to kind of two things, and like we will get back to affordability, listeners, but this does bring me to two things that I like wanted to discuss a bit as well. And so, like, one of them is uh, about political consultants and like kind of how I think that they've drawn us further to the right. But the more directly to this point that you just are bringing up is like that I think we also need to, as citizens, get very serious about demanding more from our politicians in the form of things like town halls, for example, in the form of things like constituency meetings of any kind, even if that's like, like making the effort to have trying to book one on one meetings with our MPs or our members of our provincial legislatures, because I mean, right now during this Trump era, one of the things that is giving me some hope on this side of the border is that there are these Republican town halls happening where Republicans are going to these town halls of these Republican lawmakers and yelling at them
Oh
and
yeah,
saying,
everyone's
like,
auntie is pissed right now. Like
yes, deeply so. And so this is the thing is like in Canada, um, we've moved much further to the right because of political consultants, and I can talk a little bit about why I think that is in a minute. But um, to keep our institutions, and to like stop, because I mean, even if we like take a minute to just talk about the hot second where Mark Carney was prime minister before he called this election, um, his cabinet A was tiny. Like, you can say what you will about Justin Trudeau, but he did have a gender balanced and pretty racially and background diverse cabinet, while he was prime minister. And Carney's cabinet was not gender balanced and was extremely white. And there are definitely limits to what we can take from identity politics. There, not all skin folk are kinfolk. But at the same time, it is concerning to me as an Indigenous woman to like not see myself represented, even if it's not like someone who I agree with politically, like to know that someone I can have a common conversation with is not in cabinet, like, is of
Yeah.
concern. Um, and in terms of and this, like, I guess also ties into our affordability stuff because people think that like, one thing I've noticed, I guess, is that it doesn't seem like politicians campaign on ideas anymore. And what I mean by that is specifically that, say what you will once again about Justin Trudeau, but in 2015, he literally campaigned on raising taxes.
Yeah.
Like, that seems unimaginable, in the given the in the affordability situation we find ourselves in now. But that's in part because it would involve explaining to people the difference between paying through taxation and paying at the point of service. And so when we think about the $10 a day daycare promise, that's a combination of paying at the point of service and paying through taxation. Our healthcare system is we pay through our healthcare through our taxes instead of, like, every time we go to the doctor, we actually pay the doctor their hourly wage, right? Um, and so with the $10 a day childcare, that's heavily subsidized through our tax system, or, like, once
Yeah.
it's operational, it exists in Quebec, but once it's operational, it'll be heavily subsidized through our tax system. And then there's a much smaller um, fee at the point of service with your actual daycare provider. um, and
Yeah.
and so this is the thing, is like, yes, it does take more time and space and, like, to explain these kinds of things to people. And certainly people's attention spans have likely gone down. But if I have to hear someone say axe the tax or the lost liberal decade one more time, I'm going to lose my mind.
Yeah.
Because people just say buzzwords. Like, they don't mean anything.
And that's, I mean, the consultification that you're talking about, like that I think has been the biggest, impact of it is like none of them seem like people. I think arguably, like, I mean, at least in the debate, Carney seemed the most human most of the time. Jagmeet did actually made the case for that a few times in his rebuttals to things that Polyev was saying. Like at one point, Pierre Polyev was talking about axing the tax, and Jagmeet pointed out rightfully that yeah, that the tax is going to save families making a certain amount of money a year. I forget the exact number, but it was like families making a certain income level a year is going to save them like $850. It's also going to cost them hundreds of dollars in daycare because he's axing the tax that was going to pay for that daycare program. And
Right.
and that was a really good point to make. I wish he had made it during his actual prepared statements instead of like every time he got to
Yeah.
make a statement it sounded like he was reading off a teleprompter even though there was no teleprompter. And that was the same thing with Polyev, the same thing. I mean, to an extent, Carney felt the most authentic in that way, but even he like is like 80% platitudes. And I think the a thing that really frustrates me about the kind of like one, it's very clear that someone told them to say that. Like it doesn't ring
Yeah.
true or authentic at all. But more importantly, like it's also very clear that what they're trying to do. Well, okay, it's very clear to me. I don't know if this lands for people. It definitely doesn't work on me. Maybe it is landing for people, but what it's very clear to me that like what they're trying to do is avoid saying anything at all because they don't want to say anything that
Yeah.
might upset or offend someone. But then like that's why people feel like politicians are full of shit because they are. They're not saying anything.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, like, that, like, the fact that Jack Mead seemed most real in his responses really speaks to his background as a litigator, because he's actually used to speaking on his feet. Because as a lawyer, when you're in court, you actually have to answer questions from the judge, and you can't just use buzzwords, and you can't ask for the judge's questions ahead of time, which is one of the things that Polyev is trying to do with journalists. And so, like, it makes sense. And, like, that dichotomy of, like, the jagmeet who's been trained and coached to say specific things in his, like, answers to questions, as opposed to Jagmeet, the off the cup, able to respond quickly. Like, it makes sense that that's the split, right? Because
Yeah.
the political consultants are the ones who are doing the coaching, and Jagmeet, like the lawyer, is the one who's responding off the cuff. I will say, like, so for our American listeners, the fourth political party that was on the stage is the regional vaguely separatist party from Quebec. And I will say that their leader, Yves Francois Blanchet, did have an incredible line and a true fact point when talking about so-called energy security in Canada and the construction of pipelines. Which, when talking about that, he pointed out that building any kind of large infrastructure project usually takes at least a decade, if not up to 15 years.
Yeah.
At which point he pointed out that Donald Trump will not have been president for at least 10 years by the time of a completion of any kind of infrastructure project like that.
Yeah.
And also, he then added that obviously someone much more, much less awful, something
Yeah.
along those lines, will then be president.
Yeah. Actually, you know
And
what? I
like,
retract my earlier statement. He is the realest person.
yeah, but I mean, the other thing about him being the realest person is like he can afford to be that because like the constituents to which he is trying to, especially in the English language debate, right? Like,
Yeah.
uh, so few Bloc Québécois voters are Anglophones, right? That like he doesn't like. There's
Yeah. You can say
basically
whatever he
no one
wants.
he's trying to. Yeah, there's no one he's trying to convince in that specific debate, right? And
Yeah.
so yeah, he kind of he there's a reason why he was like the realest of them all. But I think even in French, it's likely that that's also to an extent the case, because
No,
I
I watched
do
the French
think
debate. He
that
was exactly the same. Like, he
right,
was,
yeah. And so then
that's
it's
just
like
who he
this is
is. Like, for
yeah,
better or for worse, because he's also like everyone. Well, not everyone, because I'm not Quebecois, but he's that guy. Like,
he's the
he's
same vibe. Yeah, okay.
same vibe. Like, he's great on some of the issues. Like, there are a lot of things that he brought up that, like, very, like, his pipeline point was excellent. He also, like, randomly would rant about Muslims for no, like radical Islamists, and I was like, oh yeah,
Oh yeah,
that's
there we
Quebec.
go. That's
Um,
Quebec. But yes, I mean, I guess like briefly to we the sidebar from which we were barring was
yeah.
affordability, and so I mean to return us a little bit to that, like, and we can tie in with Quebec, like, one of the things that like Quebec actually does do very well is have excellent. It both has excellent protections for renters through this thing that's like called the Régie. I think that's short for something, but I forget what. A former Montrealer here, but they have excellent protection for renters. Like, for example, you're not allowed to take a damage deposit in Quebec. It's illegal. Um, and
It's also illegal here, incidentally, but people do it anyway.
oh, that's bad. Ontario, come on, get
Yep.
with it. But and then like interacting, like going to court. Uh, Landlords are not allowed to like have lawyers represent them at court. They have to show up themselves to like because
Interesting.
they have a specific legal like medium that is just related to renting issues, and so you're not allowed to represent yourself through a lawyer. You have to represent yourself, and so
Yeah.
um and so this is like, so that's the thing about Quebec is it actually does have like some really, and like Quebec funds its universities. I mean, they've been cutting that a lot recently, but historically Quebec has funded its universities substantially more than the rest of Canada, which is why tuition in Quebec for Quebecois
Hmm.
people is like significantly cheaper. And so once again, like Quebec has higher, like Quebec also benefits from like equalization and like all these other like forms of federal funding, which is like, which they get flagged on a lot for in the rest of Canada. But like they actually use that to like create quite a good quality of life for people who live there, which is more than we can say for a lot of other provincial governments in Canada, who even ones who are wealthy and are have provinces.
True. Yeah. I mean, like, there are a lot of ways in which Quebec is weird for people who are listening from outside of Canada, or from the side of Canada where you don't normally interact with Quebec, because in a lot of ways it's like socially much more left wing. Well, not even just socially, like politically much more left wing than the rest of Canada, except if you are brown.
Brown.
um, there. they're just also so racist for some reason. They're like,
And
yes,
it
we
doesn't.
love social programs unless anyone involved in anything is wearing a hijab. And then we're like, absolutely not.
Well,
Um,
I was also going to say it actually doesn't even matter what brand of brown you are, right? Because they also really hate Native people, you know?
that's
So it's
true.
like,
They're just, yeah.
yeah.
I mean, the
Hmm.
irony of this is a thing that like one of the points in my notes to prepare for this was literally like, why do we let the loi québécois be a thing? Like, it's crazy because one of the and look, I understand the like nation within a nation thing, but the irony of like being a group of people who like are living on land that they stole from other people
Right.
and then like insisting on your own cultural and language rights is like so fucking delicious to like the irony of it. I'm like, do you guys not hear yourselves? Like, do you not? They're like, yes, we have to protect our culture and our language from the overwhelming
The
majority of people. And
imperialists.
I'm like,
Yeah.
I wonder like where we might have heard this also from other groups of people. Like, it's crazy to me that they don't see it. But
Yeah.
yeah, no, I mean,
No.
tying it back into affordability for a second, like, and also back to pipelines, like the entire conservative plan, affordability plan, was we're going to build more pipelines, which like it was not at all clear to me or anyone else, I think, how that is going to make anything more affordable. Like, okay, like maybe gas will be cheaper. Like maybe gas will be cheaper. Maybe some people will work, extracting the oil. So like in that sense, things will be more affordable for those people because they have jobs that pay pretty well. They're also terrible and like physically demanding and just like no job security. And working on an oil rig is like not fun. That's not a thing. It's a very like
There's
Dickensian.
um there's an there's an excellent book. It's a graphic novel by Kate Beaton, who
Oh
is from
yes,
Cape. Yes, who's from Cape Breton, Nova Scotia. The book is called Ducks, and it's about her experience working in the Alberta oil fields. I'd highly recommend it to anyone interested in who's like I have family members who've worked in Alberta for on and off, some who've moved there permanently, some who worked in fly in, fly out capacities. And so, for people who aren't familiar with like what that life entails, I would really recommend reading that book because it doesn't just define Alberta; it also defines a lot of experiences for people who live on the east coast of Canada or like other rural or economically depressed parts of the country. Um, but like on that, like, first of all, Fort McMurray, Alberta, it literally costs almost like $1 million for a trailer.
yeah,
So
it's outrageous.
when we talk about affordability, it's like, even like the other thing is like those jobs create artificially inflate the prices of things like whatever they're nearby. But also like this is probably a good time to like do one of my first fully native asides, I suppose. Now, the
Agreed.
problem with like the pipeline stuff is like it's did you notice how no one talked about indigenous people during the pipeline version like portion
There
at
are a lot of
all?
things that
Like,
nobody talked about during the pipeline portion. We'll talk about indigenous people first because I mean
but
that's
like,
very
yeah,
important. But like, there's a lot of things that we just didn't bring up. But yes, indigenous
yeah.
people, no one brought them up. Yeah,
No,
you're right.
yeah, like, and it's like, oh, like, and so whose land? Upon whose land are these pipelines being built, may I
Yeah,
ask, right? Like, that was like cuckoo bananas. It speaks to this point that my mentor, Alan Downey, who's a DeKalb historian who teaches at McMaster University, he recently wrote a paper for the Canadian Historical Association's journal where he's talking about like in the history of that journal, Allen's article is the fourth article published by an Indigenous person. That journal is 100 years old.
that's
And
crazy.
one of the things he talks about in the article is like he did like a review where he like him and some graduate students like looked through the journal for any articles by indigenous like about indigenous topics. Then they checked the identity of the person, and then they like made some qualitative assessments about the type of narrative that is being shared in the article. And one of the consistent themes is that Indigenous people are often framed in Canadian history as roadblocks against progress. And so when they're talking about pipelines and they're not talking about Native people, um, it's because that is the framing, right? The frame is that, well, this is now a national project. The national project is to build the pipeline. And so if you're a Native person, then you're against Canada because you're against this national project, right? And so it like immediately oppositionally sets up. Like it's not like we need to find the best path forward, or we need to diversify our economy so we're not so dependent on selling oil, right? Like there are so many different kind of approaches that could be taken that were Indigenous people for not wanting to have toxic oil
Yeah.
flowing over our lands, like that, like making us be the bad guy for not wanting that. And like that kind of framing is like it also is like, yeah, it's a form of trying to manufacture consent for it. And
Yeah,
so
which, to
that
be fair, Pierre Polyev, who is the person who is most pro this pipeline, like the liberal government was kind of ambiguous about whether or not they would actually build the pipeline. Pierre Polyev has explicitly framed Indigenous people that way on multiple occasions. Like he's not shy about
yes,
how he feels about Indigenous people, and so it's not like an accident that that framing is showing up in if anything, it's more surprising that it was so subtle that he didn't just be like, yeah, and also we're gonna like fuck them like on stage, because
yeah,
that's how he feels
well,
very
there's
plainly.
like,
Like,
yeah, absolutely. And then like, and I know we wanted to talk a little bit about like Chinese versus like Chinese EVs. So like we'll like side by that for a second. But like another thing that obviously gets lumped in with Indigenous people, but like they're definitely colonial environmentalists. So like too, is like also during the pipeline stuff, like both like before we like did this recording, like we shared some voice notes, and one of the things you mentioned was like, where was climate change? Like no one
yeah,
talked about climate change during
that
this
was another.
debate.
That was the other thing that we're not talking about. Is no one wanted to talk about why we didn't want these pipelines. We were like, yes, we
Right.
want the pipelines. We don't want the pipelines. No one at any point has said why we don't want the pipelines. It feels like we're just
Yeah.
not talking about climate change anymore because we don't want to acknowledge that it's happening. Like,
Yeah, and it's like our mutual friend Lex introduced me to the word polycrisis, which she did not need to define for me, but I was like, damn, I hate that. I don't need a definition for this word because we are living through way too many crises at once. And so, like I think, like yeah, it is just
yeah,
I
I
can't
I
believe,
also did not need a definition
yeah,
for that word, although it did immediately conjure like a polycule who are like having a real, like just all having
a
arguments at
real
once, like
crisis. Yeah,
across.
yeah.
Yeah. Um,
Fair. But yeah, and so then like the other thing too is that I remember not even that long ago, like maybe like 5 years, like little more than 5 years ago, there being a pretty good public conversation about this idea of like a quote unquote just transition, right? Which is the idea that people who work in the resource extraction industries have a lot of skills that are also useful to the green transition, right? So if you are a carpenter, and you're working on like a mine site, or like if you are a welder and you're like working in the oil sands, those are like you have skills that you can also use to like put up solar panels or like work on putting up like wind turbines or like these kinds of or like like if you're a carpenter you can learn there are these like really simple technologies we can use like when it comes to housing, right? So if you have like a house that's like south facing and you have lots of windows, then like the sun will heat your house for you, right? Like, and
yeah,
so part of it is part of it's education, but like also part of it is like making sure that uh there's a good like there's a good matching um between government policy so that and like advertising business case, like two people with these skills. And an actual really good example of this is the mini split. Um, what are those things called? Heat pumps. Like the heat pump subsidy that the
Right.
liberal government did, because in Newfoundland, for example, we're really on the forefront of climate change. And so, like, when I was a kid, having like a 22-degree day in the summer, or like 75 degrees for our American listeners, that was like a warm day. Like, that was like a nice warm summer day. When I was living in St. John's in 2022, it was regularly 30 degrees Celsius in my apartment. So that's like a full, like, 8 degrees Celsius change in 20 years, which is wild.
That's
And
alarming. Yeah.
so, yeah, and so we don't have air conditioning, right? Like like in the 90s, my parents could drive we could drive for 2 hours from my house in St. John's to our cabin and not use the air conditioning because it wasn't hot outside when we were driving, even though it was July, you know? And so now, like, those mini splits, they're good because in the summer they can like give you air conditioning, and in the winter they bring in heat, right?
Yeah.
And so there's like businesses that popped up in St. John's because like there are these guys who, like, through this government subsidy, are now able to sell a product that previously was more of a hard sell, right? And so it's not that these policy choices like aren't possible, they are possible, but like we're not seeing that leadership from people, because like somehow pipelines are the answer, question mark. Like
And that's the
I
thing
have
that
no
frustrates me to know, like the pipelines are one, the pipelines are not the answer because of the climate crisis. But even like Jagmeet's thing was the east-west energy grid, which is like great. That's theoretically more environmentally
something.
friendly. It's something, although it was like I wish he had explained what exactly that is. Like I looked it up, but like I wish that, like, because I feel like people don't really know
Yes.
what that means. But like the we it I one of the things that really frustrates me about the whole green transition is it feels like that has taken a complete backseat to the economy, right? So they'll just say like, oh, like economic,
Like as though they're separate things, but they
as though
don't
they're separate
have to
things, yeah.
be.
And so here's the thing, like we people talk about it as if we don't have the technology, right? They're like, okay, well, like we are dependent on fossil fuels right now. We couldn't 100% transition to renewables, but that's not accurate. Like it's particularly in Canada. Like we have a ton of empty space to put turbines. We have a ton of empty space to put solar panels. The one of the reasons that we don't have those things already is that fossil fuel companies are actively working legislatively and otherwise to prevent that from happening, because we would be producing a surplus of electricity such that we would create negative demand. Like if we were to transition 100% to solar panels, and we could do that, we like electricity would be so cheap that they would have to pay us to use it. Like that's
Yeah.
why we don't have 100% renewable energy. I mean, it's more complicated than that, obviously, but like the idea that we don't have the technology to do this, and like the idea that we're going to have to just look into carbon capture, like that was a thing that Mark Carney just threw out on stage as if carbon capture is a technology that fucking exists when it doesn't. Like
It does not.
yeah, like they're like, oh yeah, we'll do carbon capture, and it's like, okay, maybe that is like theoretically, like from a scientific perspective, that is possible. Maybe we do not currently have the technology to do that. That's one piece of it. The second piece of it is we do not, even if we did have the technology, we don't know that that would solve the climate crisis. Like the climate is complicated. Just taking carbon out of the atmosphere that we put into the atmosphere, there's no guarantee that that would reverse any of the effects of climate change. Like we actually don't know that because we've never tried it. You know what would? Maybe mitigate some of those effects is not putting any more fucking carbon in the atmosphere. Like it's a silly idea to just be like, yeah, we're
So
going to
silly.
invent new technologies when we have technologies already that could be addressing this issue. um
Yeah. No, 100%, 100%. And like and again, this is like these are policy related, these are policy choices that are structuring us into not being able to transition as quickly. And so, you mentioned the lobby from fossil fuel companies. Another one is like this like weird dislike of China, right?
Yeah,
Because Chinese electric vehicles are rolled out in New Zealand, right? Like they're like in New Zealand, they have tons of Chinese electric vehicles. Um, and instead in Canada, because Canada is like if America is Coke, then Canada is Diet Coke. We have decided for some reason that like we don't want Chinese EVs because instead we want to pay like I can't remember what the math on the new auto plant in Ontario is, other than it being completely batshit, but it was something like $10 million in subsidies per $100,000 job or something.
correct. It's something
Um,
like that.
and yeah, it's something just completely out to lunch. Like there's, yeah, and so this is the thing is if we were serious about a green transition, instead of subsidizing like those guys to the tune of $9,900,000 per year per job, what if we like helped those guys set up companies where they did things like install mini splits or like improve people's home insulation? Because in Canada, since we get winter still, hopefully forever from as an Inuk, um, like we will our energy costs in the winter are like one of our biggest energy sinks. And
Yeah.
so if we improve like the rating of everyone's insulation in everyone's home, that's like a huge way to save energy during the winter, right? So it's like we are for some reason committed to certain ideas of like what things are supposed to be like, and so we're quote unquote supposed to manufacture cars, and we're like and like China's bad, therefore instead of just letting China sell like reasonably priced electric vehicles, again affordability, reasonably priced electric vehicles to Canadians, um instead we're gonna like spend money subsidizing private corporations that are already making a profit to like
Yeah.
set up an electric battery plant in Ontario.
We have like more than 100% tariffs on the Chinese EV manufacturers. And look, we don't even actually need to diversify. Like all of those jobs could just be for BYD and like other like Chinese companies could just manufacture their EVs here. They are actually, there is a BYD plant in Ontario. It just only so there are no commercial or sorry, there are no consumer electric vehicles here, but there are EV trucks like they're like for commercial
Oh.
vehicles. There are Chinese EVs in the kind of commercial shipping large 16-wheeler truck space.
Hmm.
And those are manufactured in Ontario at a plant that BYD owns in Ontario. They are still sold at a more than 100% tariff because we want, for some reason, for the American EV manufacturers to be more successful than the Chinese EV manufacturers, even though the Chinese ones are making better products for cheaper. We want to, we are literally subsidizing like Tesla and a bunch of other, I mean, not just American manufacturers, like also Toyota and a few other like legacy like auto manufacturers from Asia and Europe that are not Chinese, in order to kind of prop up the rest of the world's automotive industry to avoid it getting killed by China. And this is 100% like an alignment with American foreign policy thing that doesn't make sense, particularly in the context of like Donald Trump and this new like weird new world order shit he's trying to pull where he's like everyone has to buy our stuff even whether they want it or not. Like um
Oh my God,
in
my favorite part of that was like when they figured out like why the tariff rate on Lesotho was so high, and like that was part of how they figured out like the insanely strange way that the White House decided they wanted to like create tariffs, like in terms of which countries got like tariffed at what amount.
oh
And
yeah,
it
they
was
just chat
because
GPT'd it, right?
yeah, and it was because like Lesotho doesn't import, like I think they only import like 2% of their stuff from America, but that's because Lesotho is extremely poor, so they cannot afford to buy American things.
They're also entirely surrounded by South Africa, aren't they? Like, wouldn't it just like
Yes,
it would be silly for them to be importing anything from anywhere but South Africa because they are
correct.
surrounded on they're literally an enclave inside like even if they were buying American stuff, it would probably be coming through South Africa. Like it's
Yes.
crazy that yeah. Anyways, it's a whole they're trying to get Europeans to buy American chicken and like Ford F-150s. It's crazy. But like be in light of that, it makes even less sense that we have this like incredibly antagonistic, attitude towards China because like at this point what is the difference look, there are a lot of reasons like not to want to align yourselves with the Chinese state, and I say that as a leftist who like at least theoretically is ideologically aligned with like the Communist Party of China. Like I don't there's a lot of things that China does that I personally don't like and don't agree with, like both regionally and domestically. At the same time, like there are also a lot of things that America does, way more things, if anything, that I don't like and don't agree with. Like the argument, that you hear a lot against Chinese EVs in particular here is like, oh, the Chinese government will steal all your data. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Okay.
Like the American government is stealing all my data right now. Like that's and they're much more interested in me, if anything. Like the Chinese government does not care about you. They don't care about what you're like Tesla. If you own a Tesla right now, they can shut off your car from California. That's a real thing. They can put it into service mode from wherever they
Yo,
want in the world. Like
that's
th- th-
crazy.
it's also collecting a bunch of telemetry about you. It connects to your Wi-Fi. It's like using Instagram but your car. Like it collects all sorts of data about you. And so the idea that like Chinese EVs are somehow a security risk, like only because we don't like China. That's literally the only reason. Because American EVs are doing exactly the same shit. And incidentally, not just EVs, every car company that is making a car after like all those like Wi-Fi enabled cars. If your car has a Wi-Fi hotspot, if your car is connected to the internet in any way, it is spying on you and collecting your data, because everything that has Wi-Fi is spying on you and collecting your data. That's
Look,
the world we live in.
I just like really don't want my car to be a computer. Like, what if my car was just a car?
That would be great. I would love the happy medium for me is I do want Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. That's if we can I like cars from 2019 peak. I want a little screen. I want it to show me the map. I want to be able to use music easily and seamlessly. I do not need AI in it. Like I don't know why that needs to be a thing. I don't need to talk to it. I don't need any of those features. I just want to plug my phone in with a cable and then just do that. That's the
Yeah,
maximum level of technology we need. It also needs to get from A to B. Those are the two things we need out of the cars. Ideally, if we could get that, and also it doesn't destroy the planet and civilization, like that's the use
that's it.
case.
That's all we
Like,
want.
having said that, a lot of the Chinese EVs are super fucking cool. Like that's the other part that like I feel like no one is talking about as like a person who like I didn't drive for most of my life, and like I recently started driving and I got really into cars because I have ADHD and now it's my special interest. And like one of the Chinese EVs that's like it's 30 grand and it becomes a boat. Like you can drive into the water
What?
with it. And I was like,
No,
why? Like
Andrew. No,
yeah,
no
you could
way.
like you could
No.
boat for like 8 kilometers just upriver, and then like I mean it's not like
What?
a boat, but like that's crazy. Why are we depriving
What?
ourselves of this technology just for like xenophobia? Like it doesn't make any
What?
sense. It floats
I'm
like
literally dead.
you
What the
can
hell?
you
That's
can drive it
crazy.
into the water, and I'm like, why are we still buying Teslas? Like the windshield wipers don't work. They're such bad cars. Just let China do their thing, man. They're
Oh my
so much
god.
better at it
That's
than us at it.
incredible.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
great. So that's
Uh,
my case for letting China do whatever the fuck it wants.
yeah. I mean, one other like weird foreign policy thing we were talking about was like how Iran came up in the debate way more than literally anyone was ever expecting it to.
Yeah, like this is again like the thing that frustrated me the most out of anything in the entire debate was that, and particularly that it was also coming from the liberals. Like the conservatives I expect to be warhawks on Iran because they're fully at this point aligned with the American, foreign policy apparatus, neocon or otherwise. Like whatever horrible war America wants to do, the conservative party is like, yes, we'll nuke well, we don't have nukes, but like we'll drop bombs, we'll send people to murder whoever you want. But the Liberal Party, talking about Iran as if it's like he basically got up there and George Bush did and was like, they're in the axis of evil, they're sponsoring the terrorism, like it was 2004. Like they're just, what did Iran ever do to us? Like they've done nothing really to Canada. Like what, it's not even like we have, like, America has like imperial interests in the Middle East, and Iran is directly in opposition to those. What the fuck do we have? Like, what do we have to do with any of that? Why do we care about
Nothing.
Iran so much?
Yeah, that was like truly wild. On like the conservatives being hawkish, like, um, so, okay, another like weird Polyev. This also is like really peak Polyev. Polyev went to Nunavut a while ago to do an announcement, didn't tell anyone, and then left. So like did not meet with the premier of Nunavut, did not meet with like the MP from Nunavut. Not that I think she would, because she's NDP, but like just like went up there and was like, I'm announcing, like one of his like military promises is like, he's like, we're gonna like defend the Arctic, and we're gonna make CFB Iqaluit, something no one has ever asked for. And also like the military is used like in places like Guam, which is like an American colony in the Pacific, or in Hawaii. Like the military is deeply intertwined with the like colonial process of American empire. And like, so I'm the descendant of a dew line baby. So the dew line is the distant early warning system, which is a set of radar towers that they built across the Arctic after World War II, in case the Soviets came over. So
Right.
my grandfather built the dew line tower in my grandmother's village, and that's how they met. And
Huh.
so I am not, so like I am very aware of the history of the military involvement in the Canadian Arctic. But here's the thing: is like, uh, if the more we invest in the military in the North, the more the North becomes a target. So, like, for the love of God, I don't want to be on anyone's literal radar, Like, the less investment as possible, the better. Um, and so, yeah, I don't want a military base in Iqaluit. There's already there's already a housing crisis. There's already a water crisis. People might not remember, but like the water in Iqaluit like a few years ago got contaminated with gasoline. And then like the biggest city in the Inuit North, which I mean, to be fair, is 7,000 people, but still 7,000 people like were living off of bottled water while they like got the water remediated and the gasoline cleaned out of it for like multiple weeks,
That's
So like
crazy.
that kind of stuff's happening before they try to put a military base there. And so I just like really don't have like I just think it would go very poorly if they did. And so no, I don't want a military base. Please, for the love of God, uh don't vote conservative, but also like, try your darndest to like stop that man.
Well, so I
Um
have I have really unfortunate news for you, which is that actually all three of the parties are going to put military bases in the Arctic.
oh,
That's like
boo.
the one thing they all agreed on was military. It was one of the things I wanted to ask you about is like, how do you feel about them militarizing the Arctic? Because that's a thing that's happening. Like it's in the Liberal plan. It's even in the NDP plan to put military bases. I don't think the NDP has one in Iqaluit proper, but it does have one in Nunavut. Like they're all really concerned with an invasion from the north for some reason, which I don't like. The idea that like Russia is rolling tanks across the Arctic is wild
Like
to me.
Russia doesn't want more Arctic. Like let's be clear, right?
Yeah,
Like
they have more than enough
they have
Arctic
enough.
already. Like they're
They're
like
good.
80% Arctic. They're good. Also,
Yeah.
and like from an actual like practical military perspective, like we've been watching Russia struggle to invade the neighboring country forever. Like for like it's been like years now. And like that's not the arc. They didn't have to roll tanks across the North Pole to do that. Like the North Pole, which is like half an ocean right now. Like they need to send boats. Like they're it would be
Yeah.
much more logistically complicated to invade us from the north. It's and okay, to be
These
fair,
are great
Ukraine
points,
has been
Andrew. Great points.
I'm just saying, like, Ukraine has been propped up by American military aid this entire time. That is a fair point. I America talks a big game about letting Canada fend for itself. I do not think that they would just let Russia annex the entire north of Canada. That's like not a thing that's going to happen. Not because they like us or care about us, like not for any of those reasons, but because they
No.
like definitely just don't want Russia to be even more on their border than they already are because everyone always forgets about Alaska. Like it's just from a real politic perspective, it's not happening. And so why do we need military bases in the Arctic? If anything, I personally would be reinforcing the southern border. Like that feels like the much more pressing military threat to me is like the one that's actually making threat like Russia has not said any at no point did Vladimir Putin actually Vladimir Putin even more than that he literally on TV like last week was like yeah America can have Canada like we'll take Ukraine and like Central Asia and America can take Canada. That's fine. Like they do what they want. Like they have no interest in invading us. But you know who does? It's like it's
Someone who wants to make us the
crazy.
51st state. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, for real. It's interesting too. I guess this maybe also speaks to like the political consultant back and forth we had earlier too, because like you said, it's surprising that like even the NDP is like, yeah, military base in the north, and like I think that's in part because um, there's only 33,000 people in Nunavut, and Nunavut is a seat, and the incumbent there is NDP, Lori Idlout, and so she and so it's probably one of those things where like there might be some Inuit who like think that it's a good idea, and so it's an easy thing for the NDP to throw in so that like if there's Inuit who for some reason do think it's a good idea, then their like kind of quote unquote base is covered, so to speak. But like by and large, like the military is literally the militant arm of the settler colonial states. Like, I just don't know why anyone as an indigenous person would want that to be closer to you.
Yeah,
Um,
that was also my like I this is when I originally covered Polyev going to Nunavut and talking about opening a military base there. Like the thing that I said was and look, I don't want to tell indigenous people how to feel about anything, but I don't know that I've ever heard of an indigenous problem that would be solved by like a bunch of white 20-year-olds with guns. Like that's not I've never been like, you know what
yeah,
they need is like more people whose frontal lobes haven't developed who are armed just like in the
nearby.
middle of their
No,
towns. Like that sounds like a bad idea. Historically, that has not gone great for the
no,
indigenous peoples of this continent.
certainly not. Yeah. And so, no, I think it's pretty dumb. I mean, yeah, it's something I will be writing about a bit in the summer for a public facing audience. And especially given the political consensus around it, clearly that is something that we're going to need to like work against to like push back on.
Yeah.
um yeah, and so I do think like for our listeners, one of the things that I do really want to emphasize is that elections are just one aspect of being politically active. And so like like we were saying earlier about how everyone's racist auntie in the US is real mad right now even if they voted for Trump. And like if that like gets results, and so people go back to their caucus and they say, hey, I'm being yelled at for this, that, and the other thing, like that's not politically defensible where I come from. Okay. That's the thing, is at the end of the day, our MPs are still people. And
Yeah.
so like most people, like if you put them on the spot and you like actually ask them questions and like make them defend themselves, or at the very least, if they're good at their job, they might say, I don't know the answer to that now, but can I get back to you with it? They still have to go back to someone and get an answer. And so things like becoming involved in your local riding association for, if there's any political parties that you have more affinity with, like get involved there. And like, be active in that sense, or if there's no political party that you're particularly drawn to, getting involved in like a special interest group, like for an interest that you care about, or like regardless of who your MP is, like taking meetings with them, especially maybe if you're ideologically opposed, and trying to get them to like defend whatever position that you find especially egregious, right? Um, and because at the end of the day, like we live in like in Canada, our democracy is not representative for a bunch of different reasons that like we don't have time to get into today, but maybe someday we'll do an electoral reform episode. But yeah, and so just like stay on it. And the other thing too, I guess, like I would want to throw out, since we've been yapping
Yeah.
for a minute now, is that like, I, as much as I think there are like some significant flaws with like the NDP's campaigning, and with yeah, like the fact that they've been too they're too easily persuaded by political consultants. When people run on so quote unquote radical ideas, like that's actually resonating with people, and so like the fact that the NDP doesn't have like the courage to do that, even though their ideas as compared to the others are radical in some senses, like things like price controls for essential foods,
Yeah.
like that's done that, like Jagmeet mentioned, that's done in France and Greece, right? And so like they are still more radical, but like it's not enough, and so all of the good ideas that the Liberal Party have ever implemented are basically are stolen from the NDP, right? So
Yeah.
most recently dental care and like the minimal pharmacare that now exists, NDP. Like $10 a day daycare, NDP. The like rickety public healthcare system we have in Canada,
Yeah. The
NDP,
whole healthcare
right?
system.
uh, for people who are thinking about voting strategically, if you're in a riding where, it doesn't look like your NDP candidate has a shot, I would like highly encourage people because, given the technology we have, you can phone bank remotely. So, like, it's done through your computer. For people who aren't familiar with it, but
Yeah.
basically, if you have a Wi-Fi connection, you can phone bank from wherever. And so, I would, for people who have, and you don't have to spend like, 30 hours a week doing it. Like, we're getting towards the end now. So now it's about the final push towards election day. And if you can spend some time phone banking in a riding where the NDP do have a shot, right? Like there are some NDP stronghold seats where like it's very unlikely that they would lose, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so making sure that it's not looking good for the NDP picking up seats. They're likely going to lose. They might like actually also lose some seats. And so like there is an importance to maintaining an NDP presence in parliament, though, like if at the very bottom of the barrel, so that the Liberals have like someone who actually thinks of good policy ideas that they can steal.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point. And I think that like you're right. Like the NDP policies are good. The when I was doing the research for this episode to talk about what we wanted to talk about, I read all the policy proposals, and there is good stuff in the NDP platform. There's good stuff in the campaign promises that they've made. There's some stuff that we disagree with, as we've talked about at length now. There's some ways that they've run their campaign that we aren't super excited about, but at the same time, like if I had to pick one of these party policy platforms that I do like, and the one also that had the least stuff that I don't like in it, because we didn't even really get into like the AI stuff or like the horrible crime policy that the conservatives are getting into. And I don't know that we have time to get into that in like super deep detail, but like there's a lot of bad in all the other parties platforms. And
Lot of
so I
bad.
yeah. So I do think that it's important for people to if you are ideologically aligned with us, if are, even if you're just kind of a big L liberal, and you care about people getting like affordable healthcare and childcare and things, like the NDP is the party that makes that happen. The NDP has historically been the party that makes that happen. And if there's anywhere where a candidate who is an actual socialist who's going to propose bold things comes from, it's going to be that party. And on top of that, like just to kind of tie that whole thing together, like the the thing that gets candidates, and maybe this is kind of a sad commentary in the world that we live in, because we were talking earlier about how candidates don't really run on ideas anymore, they run on what's popular. The flip side of that, and then maybe the positive side of that, if there is one, is that if we can show people that those ideas are popular, if we can show people that like people actually do want a solution to the affordability crisis that, you know, is radical and involves some government intervention and involves some, you know, taxation, aggressive taxation of the wealthiest members of our society, like those ideas are popular. And if we can show politicians that they're popular, they will become mainstream in the same way that we've had this like manufactured consent for hating brown people to has become mainstream. Because I think that actually the the left side has a much more organic base of support than that kind of manufactured consent, because that's to me like redirected anger at the same things that would be addressed by these solutions.
No, for sure. And then, like, I guess, like, probably one of the last things I'll say too is, so right now, like, we're recording this on Tuesday night, and like the conservatives have been making some modest gains, like from where they started out at the beginning of this, like, truly incredible election, only in that it was before Justin Trudeau stepped down in January. This was really Poilievre's election to lose. To see how vastly the polls
Yeah.
swung, whatever, was wild. But uh, if they eke out a win, right? Like if because in Canada, due to the way the electoral map is split up, it's possible, and we saw it like growing up under Stephen Harper, it's possible for them to win with like 33% of the popular vote, right? So um if that happens, we really need to be prepared to like get into the streets to protect our Canadian institutions like healthcare, like funding for higher education, like the environment, because, you know, politicians at the end of the day want to get elected again. And so if we show that these things are that these things people are willing to defend them and people are willing to spend time doing so, then that helps protect them. And
Yeah.
that's why, like, in the last time I was on the show, one of the things I mentioned, like, for the Ontario election was that um, we haven't heard, like, well, during Stephen Harper's time was the last time, like, people really got out in the streets, right? And like, we haven't heard um, almost any governments actively say, we're going to cut healthcare spending, right?
Yeah.
During the last like 10 years. Um, but like because of inflation, the amount of money that's been spent on healthcare ends up going down, right? Like because costs go up, but the budgets stay the same. And so we really need to rally to protect our institutions. And so that shows the fact that no one has cut it shows that under Harper, when people got out in the streets and were like, stop fucking with Canadian services that we really care about, it showed other politicians like, oh, damn, it is so unpopular to cut these specific things that like we can't make those cuts. So we're just not going to raise the budget. We'll just leave it as it is. And so I share that to show that like it's not a sexy payoff, right? It's not a sexy payoff to
No.
be like, oh well, the liberals didn't cut healthcare further, but at the same time, like that did preserve what little level of service we still do have in Canadian healthcare, right? And so these things do have knock-on effects. Even if like they're not like a one for one, like super exciting, like woo woo, we won, because
Yeah.
unfortunately,
I
life is
think
not
that's
an
a good
Aaron
point too. Like it's
Sorkin.
important to recognize your victories as victories.
Yeah, and like that's the thing is like we don't live in an Aaron Sorkin universe, so like we're not gonna have these like Jed Bartlett like takes down like the no 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 like it's not like that in real life, and so
No.
um whatever however
In
you
real life the
vote on
libs are
election.
annoying. Like
So annoying. And like yeah, so if you no matter how you end up voting on election day, like for the love of God, don't stop thinking about politics after election day, and like whoever your if your old MP gets elected, if you get a new MP, write them an email and like tell them the stuff that you're mad about, because their staffers have to keep a tally of that kind of stuff. Like if their staffers are worth their salt, like that's one of the things the staffers do, is they're like, oh, like we got this many emails about this and this many emails about that, like during their staff meetings, right? And so
Yeah.
like it feels nebulous, but it's important to stay involved.
No, I think that's a great point. That's a great place to kind of wrap it up. Like I think that, you know, if you're going to be the kind of person who is politically engaged and going to be the kind of person who is, wants to be a good citizen and engaged in civil society, like the bare minimum that you should be doing is voting. And I know that like that's, for a lot of people that's a lot, but if you care about this stuff, it is important to pay attention. It's important to continue to participate after the electoral, process is over, because the thing that actually moves the needle is everything that happens between elections, not the
Yeah.
election itself. So stay engaged, stay attentive, stay woke. Uh, Shout out to Pierre Polyev, who does not know what that word means. And just continue to be involved if you have issues that you care about. And also, remember that like you don't necessarily need to care about everything. Like
No.
if there are things that are important to you, you can focus on those. Other people will take up the torch for things that are important to them. You don't need to be like 100% on top of every issue, because someone else is going to be. Um, and that's what coalition building is about. That's what movements are about. You don't need to be the entire movement by yourself. There are
No.
other people who are there with you. So
100%. That's super great advice. Yeah. That's super great advice, Andrew. What media are you checking out this week that is not politics?
yeah, so the media recommendation that I have for this week is the movie Sinners. I went to see that this weekend, the new Ryan Coogler movie. I am not going to tell you what it's about, and I would actually encourage you not to go and watch a trailer. I'm just going to say that it's really good and that you should go watch it, because the trailers spoil a lot of the movie, and I actually think it would be better. Like, I had seen a trailer when I went and I still really enjoyed it. So if you've seen the trailer, don't feel like you're going to like ruin the experience for yourself. But like, I think that movie would be much better, enjoyed and appreciated with that, like just going in cold. So if you have the opportunity to do that, definitely do. It's an excellent movie. If you like Michael B. Jordan, he's great in it. Everyone's great in it. Wumi Mosaku is great in it. Um, the whole movie is excellent. I highly recommend that you go see it. What's your piece of media this week?
So I have not seen a trailer for that movie, but I did see a Instagram clip that was adjacent to it. And just between that clip and the title of the film, I have an idea of what happens, and I haven't seen it yet, but I really want to go see it. So I'm gonna second you on that one.
So
And
good.
for people, yeah, for people who have not yet experienced the wonderful phenomenon that is North of North on Netflix, you need to go watch it now. It is a sitcom that is set in the fictional hamlet, which is what we call like villages in Nunavut, the municipalities. They're called hamlets. And so it's set in the fictional hamlet of Icy Cove, Nunavut. It was filmed in Iqaluit by Alethea Honoruk Baril and some other Inuit women collaborators. She is mostly, before this, was a documentarian. And so she made a documentary about Inuit tattoo revitalization. She has a documentary called Angry Inuk, which is about how Greenpeace targeted the seal hunt in Nunavut and like the negative effects of that. And then completely different, but so funny, so relatable, and like down here I have friends who aren't Inuit who are watching it who are like, oh, like even I understand, or like, like, and there's good like cross-cultural moments that can be relatable. So for example, the main character is a young woman named Sayaya who's 26 years old, and is like half white, half Inuk. And so she's at a seniors home, and one of the seniors is speaking in Inuktitut, our language, which she understands somewhat but can't speak very well. And so he, like, asks her a question, and she kind of like responds a little bit in Inuktitut and then switches to English and says, like, that her Inuktitut's not very good. And like, I have a friend here who like is not indigenous but like is biracial and has family members who speak like a non-English language. And she was like, oh, like, I get it, even though it's not 100% for the same reasons, like, I understand.
Yeah, no,
And
that's super
so
relatable to me.
yeah, yeah, and so that's the thing, and so it's like, I think that they did a really wonderful job at taking some really northern experiences, but like doing it in such a way that it's like relatable to a wider audience. And so I'm just so proud of everyone who's in the cast, and who worked on the film. Yeah, it's our film show. It's I think it's like 8 episodes, maybe they're like 20, 22 minute episodes. So like I've seen people on Facebook being like, I sat down and watched it all in one go. Yeah, highly recommend for anyone who needs a laugh.
Yeah, no, I haven't seen it yet. You did recommend it to me, and it is on my list of things to see. I haven't been in a very sitcom-y mood, but maybe this weekend I'll buckle down and watch it because it does look really funny. I did watch the trailer and it looks hilarious, and I've also been recommended it by like a number of people who are like not Inuit or indigenous at all. They just like were like, "Oh, I saw the show; it was really funny." So I definitely encourage the audience to check it out. It's on Netflix in Canada. I don't know if it's on Netflix in the States, but
It is,
is it?
yeah, it's worldwide now.
Oh, awesome!
So, yeah, yeah, it was on CBC. So CBC is one of the funders, and so they got initial rights. So it was on CBC Gem until April 9th, and then it did its world premiere on Netflix on April 10th. So it's all over. Wherever you are, you can watch it now.
That's great. Yeah, highly recommend.
I have
I will be
one of
watching it
my cousins.
myself.
One of my cousins has a couple pairs of earrings in it too, which is a
Oh,
big deal in
cool.
Native culture. Yes, yeah. So some neat
That's
stuff.
awesome.
Hmm.
All right. Well, yeah, I think we'll wrap it up there. Thank you very much for your time and for your thoughts as usual. This was fun. Hopefully we'll, if you're interested, we'll have you on again.
For sure. Thanks for having me, Andrew. Talk to you again soon.
And that's it for us this week. If you made it this far, I want to say a huge thank you for listening. I know this was a long one, but we had a lot to cover. Thank you to Saz Paris, as usual, for allowing us to use this music. Thank you to Patricia for yapping with me and for being such a great guest. And once again, if you're in Canada, please do vote on Monday if you haven't already. If you like what you heard, please like and subscribe, give us 5 stars, say a prayer to Karl Marx, and light a candle for us in a factory somewhere. We'll be back next week with a different topic. Until next time, I have been your host, Andrew, and you have been listening to the Bad Eye Podcast. Be easy, y'all.